Okay.
Anyways, appreciate you doing this. Like,
Oh man, it's my pleasure.
Abilene warms today.
You know what? It's gorgeous. It's about 75 degrees. This is one of those Chamber of Commerce days here in Abilene. It is. It was about 50 this morning and 75 this afternoon. So we're pretty happy around here.
Oh man, that'd be amazing. Yeah, we're freezing. It was 29 when I woke up.
No.
Oh, so I sent you. Appreciate you doing this. So just
Yeah.
quick, just to kind of set the stage and remind you of kind of the purpose of PodCasket is to tell the stories of who we consider the legends of death care, who have built this profession into what we're all benefiting from today. I recognize, like, even my opportunities here with funeral service wouldn't exist if it weren't for everybody doing their part and building what's been built. And you've had a huge part to play with that, and I appreciate that. So,
Well, I appreciate you saying I'm a legend, but I don't ever view myself that way. I mean, this has been a fun ride for me. I know as it has for you.
yeah, great people. That's the main thing. Is just I've done a few different startups in other industries, but this is it's just the best one.
Yeah.
So to kick off kind of questions before we get into like any questions you're expecting, I like to just start with something that maybe you haven't really thought about. And just to kind of get to know you a little bit. So what's your favorite way to exercise?
That's a good question. I like that one because I do a lot of it. Actually, I may not look like it, but I do. It's to support my eating habit. But every morning I wake up at 5:20 in the morning. Well, actually 5:21 if you want me to be exact. I'm a very meticulous person and I have to have my routines, right? So I get up in the morning. I usually get a big glass of water to get me started. And then I, proceed to do my reading. And I like to read some type of devotional, and I do Bible reading every day. And so that's what I do to start my morning. But then by 6 o'clock, straight up, I have to be, I have a little fitness area in my house, and I have to be exercising. So at 6 o'clock, I am doing something. And this is funny. You're going to laugh at me. Okay. Don't judge me on this.
Jazzercise.
I've been doing Beachbody on demand. Okay.
Oh, nice.
In fact, I just got recognition for doing a over 1,000 videos. So
wow.
Yeah. So over the years, I have done a lot. It started with, Tony Horton and the, PX90,
P90X,
P90X,
yeah.
P90X. Yeah, that was the very first thing I started. And then since then, I've just tried different ones of their programs. And, I really like it because it gives me a little bit of, cardio, but then it also does some weight training and things like that I need to do. And as I get older, I see the importance of getting a little weight training in as well. So, yeah, that's my routine. I'm usually done by about 10 minutes till 7. And, I try to get done by then. It takes me a little longer than you, Curtis, to warm up these days. So, I have to do a little stretching to get going. And then, by 7, I try to eat a healthy breakfast. And then by 8 o'clock, be to the office. Of course, I don't have to, do much with my hair anymore. So it makes it pretty easy to get to the office. So
cuts down the getting ready time. That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's great. 1,000, man. And honestly, it takes a different level of motivation, I think, to work out at home.
I think that kind of helps on the videos because, you feel like you've got a few people with you or something like that. But how I learned to do it, and this from being on the road, when you're going to conventions and meetings and all that kind of thing, and you're staying in hotels, sometimes most of the time, the hotel fitness center is not good enough. And so unless you do a lot of running, and I had to stop doing that. So, it's one of those deals where I thought, what the heck, I can do this in a hotel room. And so that's what got me motivated to start it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on your 1,000th class.
I don't know if you should congratulate me or not.
That's a big deal, man. Okay. Well, want to hear your story. So let's start from the beginning. Like where you're from, where you grew up,
All right.
family.
Well, it's a pretty decent story because my dad was a funeral home owner, and so this kind of gets into how I got into business. And so when I was 3 days old, I entered my first funeral home. Okay, so we lived in the funeral home back then, and I grew up in West Texas. Grew up in a little town called Snyder, Texas. Started working at the funeral home when I was 12 years old, like a lot of sons of and daughters of funeral home owners. And I learned to work everything in the funeral home, and it gave me a good foundation. The kind of my deal was when I was 17, I was working at the funeral home with my dad, and we made a first call, and it was a guy who had an accident out in the field, and that guy was a friend of mine. And making that first call, it was kind of at that point I told my dad, hey, I value what you do and I value funeral service, but this just isn't for me. So I went off to Baylor University, got my degree in accounting and finance, was going to go out and practice public accounting when my dad called me and he said, hey, me and 3 other West Texas funeral home owners have bought a little insurance company. And could you possibly come out and help us get it started because we're not having any success right now? So as you can imagine, getting a call from your dad, you're 22 years old, and he says he wants you to come help him start something, you probably would determine that I was his last resort. Okay. I mean, they didn't have a lot of options. And so I told him, I said, Dad, you took care of me in college. I'll come out and give it a year and see if we can get something going. So there was me and 4 other employees and about 1,100 square foot office space. And we started trying to make something a funeral director's life insurance company. So
And it
that
was
was kind
called
of
that then too?
yes. When they purchased it, it was called Wilkerson Burial Insurance Company. And when they took it over completely, they started calling it Funeral Directors Life Insurance Company. So by the time I got there, it was Funeral Directors Life.
Okay.
That was 1985, believe it or not. So I have been the manager / president of this company it will be 40 years on June the 1st.
Wow.
So,
Hey, that's 3 days after my wife was born.
thanks, Curtis. That makes me feel good. Thanks.
I was old by then. I was already like 7 months old. So,
Yeah, I know. So yes, I have seen a lot in funeral service, but that's kind of the humble beginnings of this. And, I stuck with it my year, and it was a challenge. I'm just going to say that it was a challenge, and I like challenges. I'm a really competitive person. And so that being a challenge and competitive, I wanted to stick with it and get it to be successful because it was not back then. It was losing money and, burning capital. And it was, again, just enough of a challenge that I stayed at it and enjoyed it enough that, I wanted to see it be successful.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was your home like before you went off to Baylor, like siblings, and what
Yeah,
was the day to day like?
Yeah, I had an older sister. She's now deceased. She died in 2017.
Oh, dang.
She was 13 years older than me, and so I really didn't know her. I mean, by the time I started figuring things out at 5 or 6 years old, she was off at college already. So she was a drama. She majored in theater, and so she was a drama teacher. And so her interest was not in funeral service at all. And so she never really was part of the business. Her husband at one point was in the funeral service business, but he was a teacher also. And so I never really, I was raised more or less as an only child. And so that was kind of a interesting thing. And I was, again, like I said, very competitive. So I was in sports. I loved basketball. So I played a lot of basketball and loved the sport. Continue to love the sport, follow college basketball like crazy, and so that is kind of my motivator, is just the competitiveness that I have.
Yeah, and in Snyder, Texas, was basketball out at like a park, or where were you playing?
Usually in my driveway. So my dad was kind enough to put up a goal, and we had a pretty nice sized driveway. So all the kids in the that lived in or around my house would come over and play at my house. And so, yeah, until I could get the key to a gym, you know, back when I was starting to drive. But again, it was a little tiny town. We were a small school, but you know, I had all my friends. That's really how I learned to be a leader, was actually through youth sports. And so I'm still motivated today. I am the chairman of the board of a thing I started in 2003 called the Abilene Youth Sports Authority. And so that's kind of been a passion of mine, is to say, what can I do to help the youth become better oriented toward leadership through a better experience in youth sports. And so we work hard with that. We bring Christian values to youth sports here in Abilene, and it is a nonprofit organization. And so we own an entity with 4 basketball courts and converts into 8 volleyball courts, and that's been a passion of mine. We built that in 2017, and today we're building a 10 field soccer complex with 4 synthetic fields and 6 grass fields to support youth outdoor sports. So it'll support soccer fields and football. So, yeah.
And the 4 turf ones will be outdoor as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So what got you to start that? Like the Abilene Youth Sports Authority?
Oh,
like
boy.
what?
Here you go. Now you're going down the path.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So we, back in 2003, I was kind of going through, if you want to call it a midlife crisis. I don't want to go that far, but I turned 40 and I was trying to figure life out, and wondering, gosh, was this really what I was supposed to be doing all along? And, you know, am I doing the right things now? And so at that time, you know, it's kind of one of those deals, Curtis, where I felt like I had to be one person at work and then another person at home and a different person in my church and a different person in the community. And all of a sudden it just started getting exhausting. And so I was really tired. And so I had to figure out a better plan. So believe it or not, I got with a group of men from my church, and we went and did a very intense study of a book called Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. And that really changed my perspective on life. And I had to get back and change a lot of things in my life. And one of them was I was on virtually every committee and board in Abilene, and it was taken away from my family. And so I had to really reprioritize things in my life. So I had to make sure that my wife was number one, which, by the way, we will in June be married 41 years.
Wow.
And so that was a great time for us and for me to recommit myself to our marriage, and then also to my kids and my family. That's when I got involved in coaching youth sports and getting to see some of these youth sports facilities. And it made me say, man, we need to have something like this in Abilene, because we're a very, very family-oriented community. You know, we're not big enough to have, you know, professional sports or anything like that. So this is a really family-oriented place. And so it was just in my heart to do something to support youth sports. So I got off of every other board and committee. I committed myself to my wife, to my family, and then to our business here, because this is really my community. And it's where I get a lot of life from it. And then the fourth thing was to make sure I was doing something to give back, and that was what I could do with this nonprofit. And I started the nonprofit Abilene Youth Sports Authority, and that's what has caused us to really bring a new aspect to youth sports here in our area, in this region, actually.
That's amazing. How many athletes do you have on in programs at a time?
Well, I'll just give you some examples. We do leagues, we do tournaments, we do clinics, we do coaching clinics to try to help coaches, you know, who are dads and moms, do a better job of coaching kids. We do all kinds of things. But for example, we had a last weekend we had a 77 team basketball tournament, little dribblers.
Wow.
And prior to that, we had a 88 team volleyball tournament here in town. Again, we're attracting, because of our facilities and the way we do tournaments and the way we do events, we're attracting teams from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Oklahoma, New Mexico. Just kind of this region is all coming into Abilene now to play youth sports. And that's what encouraged us to build these outdoor fields, is to help that out as well. But I mean, we'll have, for example, we're looking at football, because football is a big deal in West Texas.
Yeah.
Friday night lights and all that stuff. But doing touch football, flag football. This year we had over 500 teams in boys football. That's 500 teams. So that represents about 3,500 kids and youth involved in just touch football.
Wow.
It's sponsored by, and we work with Fellowship of Christian Athletes on that. When we build this facility, we're going to start a girls league. We believe there'll be over 500 teams playing touch football for girls. And so we're, again, it's one of those things too. And we don't really have a soccer organization here in town. We do, but it's not run very well. But still, we probably have, 200 or 300 soccer teams that play soccer here. And it's just crazy the amount of people that are involved in this youth sports. And so we just felt like it was important to bring something else to the community that would be positive and help, kids have a better experience. And that's what we're trying to do.
That's incredible. I got a couple more questions on this. So athletes, you have any athletes that have gone through your programs and have ended up playing collegiately or professionally?
Well, my son is one. Drew.
True.
Yeah, Drew actually ran track at Baylor. He was
awesome.
a 400 guy. He was actually for 2 years the captain of the track team. So he ran the 400 meter, and he was 3-time All-American indoor and 3-time All-American outdoor.
Whoa.
And he was fast, man. And he didn't get that from me. He got that from his mother. His mother ran track at Baylor also. They timed me with a sundial. So I didn't have that talent, but I'm grateful that he did, because it helped pay for his school too. So
yeah, that's incredible. What would he run the 400 in?
Well, he did both the open and the relay. In the open, around 46 flat, maybe just a little north. And then if he would run in a relay, he'd run under 46, and then the 45.6, 45 range, 45.5, 45.6 range. But it was fun to watch. Fortunately, I got a chance to go watch him everywhere from New York City to the Drake Relays in Des Moines to the National Track Meet in Eugene, Oregon. So we've been everywhere watching him run track. It was our pleasure to do that. It was fun.
Yeah, there's something about we've got watch our nephews and nieces and compete in sports, and there's something about track meets. It's like it's a whole different level of stress, because there's no room for error. Yeah. Right. Anything else, you're going to play for 2 or 3 hours. You can make a few mistakes. No big deal. Track, it's like perfection or not.
You're so right.
It's so intense.
Well, and like I said, I never ran track, so I didn't really understand it. But now I'm a huge track fan, because it's just intense. You're right. You can't make a mistake. You've got to practice, and then you run for 46 seconds and it's over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But, again, I've just become a big fan of track, because the athletes are incredible. I still will say this, though, and mark my words on this. The best track event is the 300-meter junior high girls hurdles. It's the best event. And the reason being is you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So usually the girl who gets the worst start will win the race,
Yeah.
because they get to that last hurdle and they just can't make it. The seventh grade, it's actually seventh grade, 300-meter girls hurdles. It's the greatest event in all of the events.
I'll have to go. I'll have to make it a point to go see him.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what did FDLIC look like when you started the Sports Authority? Like what was the size of the company at that point?
We were about, I'm going to say we were probably 250 million in total assets when we started the youth sports deal. When I came with the company in 85, we had 2.5 million in assets total.
Wow.
We had $350,000 in capital and surplus, and we were super small and just trying to figure it out. But by the time we got to 2003, we were around 250 million in assets. Since then, it's just exploded. So it took us. We started actually the starting of the company. Just so you know, was today 44 years ago. It was 1981 when the company was first started, so to speak.
Wow.
And so at that time, again, if you roll forward, it took us 33 years to get to our first 1 billion in assets. Then it took us 10 years to get to the next billion.
Wow.
So, yeah, so we've had some really, really fast growth here recently. I mean, we've been blessed by a lot of things, but 33 years for the first billion in assets and then 10 years for the second billion. So we're thinking 5 years for the third billion, but that remains to be seen.
That's amazing. So tell us about FDL and what it looks like today. I mean, I've seen the facility personally, and it's an awesome place. Just maybe tell us about what it looks like in terms of people and all that you're doing there, and everything else.
Okay. Well, it hasn't always been this way. And in 2003, I made a big change here, Curtis, and I think that's what's been a lot of the things that have catapulted us forward. But I changed the way I ran the business to say we're going to base the way we do business on Christian principles. And I know that, different people are at different places, and I get that. And companies are, think differently as far as this is concerned. But for us, it just made a lot of sense. And it made a lot of sense to me because I had to be, as I said, the same person no matter where I was. And that was a big decision I had to make. And it took about 3 full years to get it implemented the way I wanted it. And we're still learning. I mean, I'm sitting here 22 years later and still figuring out how to do it better. But it was just a time I had to make a decision that I had to change the way I thought. A lot of business owners and leaders think that you should not trust people when you hire them until they can be trusted, right? Well, I flipped the script to say, I'm going to do it different. I want to trust people. And then until they prove they cannot be trusted. So kind of an opposite way of thinking. And I think that proved to be successful for us. But we had to really start thinking differently about how we handled employees, how we handled customers, the different types of services that we would offer, the different type of care that we would have for those that are around us. And so we just reshaped the way we were thinking back in 2003. And, I'll kind of springboard from there. And that's a lot of things changed in my life at that time. And I think it was for the better, not just for me, but for everybody around me. And it was, the journey has been wonderful ever since then. We've made a commitment to this profession. I've really figured out the importance of focusing on the funeral profession. And it's helped us grow. And that's why we have Passari now, that led us to that. It led us to being involved in digital marketing for funeral homes. It's helped us with Claim Check, where we do insurance assignments. So, and actually we only started all these ancillary services in 2012. We really spent between 2003 and 2012 trying to figure out how to do our pre-need funeral insurance better. And we got it to a point where we were hearing and seeing needs of funeral home owners. And we just started saying, is there a way we can help our funeral home owners to take some of the burden off of them that they would like for us to? So we started these little ancillary services, and it just turned into a much bigger deal than I ever expected it to be honest with you. Never in my wildest dreams did I expect us to be here today talking about this. Number one, have over 500 employees. Number two, and pushing $2.5 billion in assets. And again, when I talk about these assets, I just want to make this really clear. This isn't our money. I mean, this is money that is policyholders, right? I mean, it's all these people who bought pre-need funerals from the funeral homes we represent. And that money we have to take care of. I have the fiduciary responsibility to take care of it, to ensure we can have claims paid at payment time, right? And so when I'm talking about that, I'm just talking about we've helped a lot of families pre-plan and prepay their funeral, and that's what's important, is making sure that we do that for funeral homes. That's the key. So, I think the big thing is too, Curtis, we have kind of five strategic objectives that we go by. Number one, we think it's important to grow personally and to grow our business. We think that's important. Number two, we want to be known as a great place to work, because we weren't known as that. I mean, think about it. Being named Funeral Directors Life Insurance Company, how many people do you think really would want to come to work for a company with that name? So we had to figure out, Tukios is much better. I'm just telling you. Nobody may understand what it is, but unless they speak Swahili. But that's a much better name than Funeral Directors Life, at least to attract quality people. And so we had to learn how to be a great place to work. And the thing that I learned in this process was not something I wanted to learn, is as we were recruiting people, I found that I was the problem. People weren't the problem. I was the problem. So I had to change the way I was looking at bringing on employees. So I changed my interview process to not be standard. We changed our building, as you said. We tried to make it very appealing. We have our own fitness center. We have a clinic that has a nurse practitioner. We've got coffee machines all over the building that grind the coffee, and again, we want this to be attractive. And so we've got desks that move up and down. In fact, I'm standing up right now because I stand up probably 5 or 6 hours a day. I don't like to sit down all day long, but it can allow our employees to work at different postures. So we were doing and thinking about those things that make this a great place to work, because what I really wanted was a list of people who wanted to come to work here and never have to recruit again. That's what I really wanted. And so we still got a ways to go in that, but we're working on it. We are called the Google of Abilene, though, Curtis.
I believe it.
Yeah, it's not hard. The bar is really low in Abilene. I just want you to know that. But we're trying to make it appealing to where people desire to come to work for us. And I think that's the big thing. So again, grow. We want to grow. We want to, be known as a great place to work. We want to be known as helpers of people. We encourage our people to get involved in nonprofits and charitable organizations, because we feel like if you do that, it makes you feel good about helping other people. And if you naturally have a heart to help others, that you're going to be a better person and a better employee of the company. And so we want to be that helpers of people. Then we want to be a leading provider of service in our profession. That's really caused us to think through things like technology, why we got involved in Passari to begin with. And then ultimately we gained control of that, and we took it over in January 1st of 2020. And that has been one of the biggest surprises of my life, is how Passari has grown. And so, because again, I don't know that much about it, but I've got some great people who do, and they're heavily involved and love helping funeral homes with that technology. And then lastly, we want to have good financial results, because our company couldn't exist unless we had good financial results. But we do think if we're growing, if we are focused on being a great place to work, if we're focused on helping people, if we're focused on being the leading provider of service to our profession, then we feel like the last thing will happen where we will have good financial results. And it's never failed. I mean, it's been unbelievable if we focus on those first four things.
No, that's awesome. And back up a little bit and tell us about the acquisition of Passari and your initial involvement in that.
Yeah, we started out in 2014. Actually, Passari started, I believe, in 2012, 2013. Then I was asked to join with them in 2014. And so actually, I think that our discussion started in 2013. And then the funeral home owners and funeral professionals who were involved in Passari wanted some additional assistance with it, both from financially as well as some additional insight into what could happen at Passari. So I came involved in 2014. Myself and one of my colleagues here, Todd Carlson, we got on the board of directors and started trying to direct, assist in the direction of the company. The company really wasn't going in a direction that we were comfortable with because they were, I think, a little too focused on trying to go direct to the families and the consumer. And we were very, very focused on trying to help funeral homes get better. And so we had some conflict for a while, and that went on for a while. And then we had, again, some financial concerns because, as you know, when you start up a tech company, so to speak, there's a lot of capital required to get it done right. Yeah. And we weren't doing it right, but we were supplying a lot of capital. And then we just bought some additional shares and we loaned some money to the company. And then ultimately we got into 2019 and we felt that it was probably in the best interest of everyone for Directors Investment Group, our holding company, to take over Passari and move it to Abilene and really focus on creating the best possible administration system as well as a collaboration system with families where funeral homes could talk to families and get more information from them but with the use of technology. And so it just came about to be a perfect thing. And so we actually merged Passari into Directors Investment Group and January 1st of 2020 was the date that we finally took over the business, but those shareholders who remained continued to remain shareholders at Directors Investment Group.
That's cool, because my understanding is like Passari, some of the original investment dollars came from funeral directors, right?
You're correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So yeah, there were several funeral home owners involved, and it was actually a study group that had gotten together and done a consumer study and found out that they needed to really change their technology. I know it's shocking to you, Curtis, that funeral homes would be poor with their technology.
Yeah.
But a few of them actually realized it back then, and it's really allowed us to step in and work on the technology for the funeral profession, just like you have. And, obviously you and Tukios has done a phenomenal job of helping funeral home owners understand the value of technology.
Yeah, it's super important. Tell us a little bit more about Directors Investment Group then. So like you say, it's a holding company over this, but just give us this background.
Okay. Well, it started back in 1992 when I found out that, some things that we wanted to do, because we wanted to own a casket company, as an example. And our casket company, we started in 1986, and we were interested in distributing caskets in West Texas because our distribution had dried up out here. And so I helped them start this little casket company. Again, remember, I'm 22 in 1985, okay? So I'm just learning leadership. I'm learning this stuff. And then we start a casket company on top of this, which was crazy, but it worked. But in 1990, we started seeing the need to have a holding company that would supplement the insurance. So run the insurance company separate because it was under the regulation of the Department of Insurance, right? So anything that the insurance company owned would then be subject to oversight by the Department of Insurance. So we started the holding company in order to help us own other businesses that would not have to be under the regulation and the authority of the Department of Insurance.
That's
Okay.
smart.
So that was the whole purpose for it. And since then, it's proven to be a pretty good tool for us. We started our own investment advisory business in 2001, as an example, Parkway Advisors, where we do investing not only for Funeral Directors Life, but for 57 other entities. And so that has proven to be a successful business for us. It wasn't in the funeral profession. In fact, it's the only business that we started that's not funeral home oriented that has been successful. We started a few others, but they were not successful. That's why we have to stay focused on the funeral profession. But that's why we have Directors Investment Group, is so that we could start other businesses and run businesses that wouldn't be under the auspices of the Department of Insurance.
Okay. That's really cool. One more thing on the office. Tell us about this sword you've got in your office.
The sword, yeah. So again, this came after 2003, and I do have a sword and a shield, as well as I have, and I'm looking at it right now because it's got the scripture of the armor of God from Ephesians chapter 6. And the sword, if you know the armor of God, the sword is the only offensive weapon talked about. Everything else is defensive, like your feet are shod, and you got the shield of righteousness and the helmet. You've got all these different defense type deals, but you have the sword, and the sword is the word of God. And so my good friend who taught me a lot as I was going through these changes, and that we worked on a lot of things together for our family's sake, he gave me the sword to say, I want you to put this in your office and have it there because I want you to know that you've always got the word of God with you. And it's the offensive weapon that will help you to not only build your business, but to help you with life. And he's right. And so, that's when I started reading scripture, because I never was really into the word very much. Not that I wasn't a person who was a Christian or whatever. I just didn't ever read the Bible. I didn't think it was important. So fortunately, I started reading the Bible back then, and I've continued it through today. I've read through the Bible many times, and I still find things that are important to me. In fact, I just got through, Exodus, but you go through Genesis and Exodus, and all of a sudden I'm reading stuff about Joseph that really brought out some things to me this time that I didn't really realize, and that he had to be humbled in order to become the leader that he became. And then in order to forgive his own family, he had to be humbled, and it took years. And God humbled him, and then all of a sudden he was ready for what God had for him. And so that's something important to me, and I think about that, and I think about that sword on the wall, and the fact that I do always have the Word of God with me, and so I'm capable of always being someone who can have confidence in the fact that the Word of God is there to help me.
That's cool. And you've got a speaking of the Word of God, you've got a quote on the wall in your boardroom that you shared with those that were at the NFDA opening ceremonies a couple of years ago would have heard it. But the Nehemiah quote, if you want to maybe share that, because I know not everyone was at that opening ceremony. It's a cool story.
And actually, it was in 2020 when I was reading through Nehemiah, and I'd read through Nehemiah a bunch of times, but I had always wondered why Nehemiah was even in the Bible, because it's about a guy who just gets an impression from God, and they're in exile, and so he has to even get permission from the king to go back. But he goes back to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. So what? I mean, it wasn't parting the Red Sea, or he didn't have to have, 40 days and 40 nights of rain. I mean, it was no big deal. And so I'd always wondered why it was in the Bible. But in 2020, when we were going through so much, and this, man, you trying to run your business going through 2020 was extraordinarily difficult. But one thing I kept coming back to in Nehemiah, and I found out Nehemiah's in the Bible for me, because it's about a guy who has to deal with a lot of adversity. I mean, he had critics inside his camp, and he had critics who were even outside of Jerusalem who didn't want him to rebuild this wall. And he would say, this is from Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3, where he would say, I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. And so I kept saying that to myself over and over. I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. And I kept saying it to myself, probably, I don't know, a dozen times a day. The rest of the verse, that's just part A of the verse, and that's what's on our wall in our boardroom. Part B of that verse is even better, I think, because Nehemiah really shows what being a leader is all about, because he says, why should I leave the work and come down to you? So if you think about that, these people are low players. They're, they are low leaders. They play low. They're not high. They're not high road leaders. They're low road leaders. I read this book John Maxwell has written recently called The High Road Leader, and that book really appeals to this. And you think about Nehemiah saying, "Why should I leave the work that God's inspired me to do, to come down to you?" So, I mean, it's just, and I try to tell this to funeral directors all the time, because, and you know this, Curtis, from being in the profession as long as you have, is funeral directors don't get a lot of pats on the back and congratulations. The families hug them and thank them, but man, they have a tough job. And sometimes when I visit with them, or they come to Abilene and they see what we've got, I'm telling them, they're doing a great job and they cannot come down, because again, they're being hit from all sides, critics everywhere. And they've got to say that to themselves a lot, because taking care of families is so important. And they do a wonderful job at a time when families really need that help and assistance and guidance the most.
No, that's amazing. That's such a great thought, because they really are. I mean, when I hear some of the statistics about how funeral directors are pretty high up on the list of professions that aren't trusted, I'm just like, it drives me crazy. And when folks talk about it, like, oh yeah, they're taking advantage of people in their time of need, I'm like, are you kidding? Have you ever met one of these people? Like, they would never. I don't know anyone in their right mind that would do that job unless they felt like what you're saying, that they're about a great work, and they're doing an amazing thing, and it's difficult and the timing's terrible. They're up in the middle of the night. I mean, yeah, I get really passionate about it when anyone makes a comment about funeral directors in the social circles, because I don't see it that way. I think you've nailed it on the head there.
Yeah, and that's just something I think we have to keep repeating. And here's the deal too. I mean, I've been in this business a long time. I don't think any of us in the profession have done a very good job of really promoting the fact that funeral directors do incredible work. We kind of hide in the shadows, so to speak, and don't really come out and talk about how important funeral service is. And, I hope our company, we're trying to do what we can now to be more of a promoter of the value of funeral service and the importance of having a healing and meaningful funeral service. And we want to figure out how we can do a better job of helping funeral directors and funeral homeowners promote ourselves and promote our profession as being something that should be valued, not something that should be criticized, but something that's valued. Again, any profession is going to have 1 or 2% that are going to be bad players in the business. But when you're talking about 98%, just look at this and view it more or less as a ministry. They just want to take care of families in their time of need. They've got to have money and they have to make money. Profit's not a bad word, but you got to have profit to exist. But the vast majority of funeral homeowners that I know, and I'm talking about 95% of all the funeral homeowners I know, are interested in one thing, and that's taking care of the next family. That's what they want to do in their heart.
Yeah. No, great point. No, and I'll take that to heart too, and think about how our company could do a better job of helping to promote funeral service to the public. But okay, I've got a list of some questions I want to ask you. But first one is, let's roll back to what happened to your dad's funeral home.
Okay. My dad, the Snyder location, my dad ultimately owned Snyder, Colorado City, which was 25 miles or so from Snyder. And then he owned Ballinger. And then he had partners in all those funeral homes. And then he partnered with a group of, with 3 other funeral home owners, and then owned funeral homes in Odessa as well.
Oh, okay.
But let's go back to Snyder, which was quote unquote the home place. My dad had a partner there. Well, it's funny. My dad had some heart problems in his late 40s, early 50s, and he actually sold the funeral home to a gentleman who brought in a guy named Jack Seipert. And then this guy, my dad got kind of his heart situation squared away. He got a pacemaker, and he was, a new man, so to speak. And Jack Seipert was employed by this other gentleman who had bought the funeral home from my dad. The gentleman who owned it had a stroke, and my dad had to take the funeral home back over. And Jack Seipert stayed there as his partner. And that was back in the, I'm going to say, 70s. And he stayed my dad's partner until my dad died. And then as part of that, though, the last years of my dad's life, we sold the funeral home to his partner. And now his son, Jack Seipert's son, is now taking the funeral home on, and is also part of our company now as one of our board members, Mark Seipert.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I feel like we've got a good background. So let me just ask some questions. Maybe we can get into some of your things that you've pulled off as a leader in this profession. So what are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of, and what did it take to pull them off?
This is a hard question, but I'm going to go back to that 2003 timeframe when I had to make a decision about the direction that I was going to take as a person and the direction I was going to take our company. And so making the decision that I was going to run our business here based on Christian principles was probably one of the more difficult decisions I've ever made, from the standpoint that I knew I would take some criticism for it. I didn't know if my people would be on board. In fact, a lot of my people around here thought that this was, Kris's management philosophy of the week, so to speak, that I wouldn't stick with it, that it would be something that we would just do temporarily. But over a 3-year period, I had some people leave. I had to let some people go, and I had to get a team that was focused as I was on trying to run our business based on those principles. And looking back now, again, that was a 3 to 5 year tough time of figuring out how we really wanted to run this business and how I was going to lead the business. And ultimately, I can look back now, of course, hindsight being 2020, and say that's the best decision I have ever made. And it has caused us to do so much good, not only for our profession, but for our community and for essentially all the people around us, the world. We've done so much now good that I just look back and say, if I had not made that decision, we would not have done the things that we've done. We would not be here. I wouldn't be talking to you. I don't think if I had not made this decision. And so when I look back, that's the quote unquote biggest accomplishment, was the conversion of our business from operating just based on worldly principles to running the company based on Christian principles. And that's really it. I wish I had something more grand than that to say, but it's been the biggest change in my life and the biggest change in this company. And it's been the thing I can look back on and say was the most successful thing we've ever done.
Well, and you've implemented it well. It's really cool to see it throughout your business. And when we came down there to visit, and it's just awesome. Like the way you guys implement. I mean, prayers before meals and everything. It's just so cool. It's cool just to see that for a day. So on the flip side, what are some of the biggest challenges? Like what's one of the toughest things you've had to overcome?
The biggest challenge, as I look at it now, was not that long ago, and it was 2020 and COVID. To me, that was the biggest challenge because I really wasn't in control. And it's what drove me crazy is, and you know this, Curtis, running a business, you wake up every day and there was something new or something different, or figuring out how to work remotely and figuring out how to, get your company in sections or areas where you could keep people separated, then working remote and not being able to come into the office. And we had a big problem. This will be interesting to you. Is on we were doing really well in growing the business until March of 2020, and when March 20th of 2020 hit, I can tell you in April, our business, our revenue dropped 60%.
Wow.
In April.
Yeah.
So you think about this from our insurance company perspective. We had prepaid funerals, right? That's what we sell. So you think about funeral homes all of a sudden got busy, right? The funeral homes all of a sudden started doing a lot of funerals because unfortunately the COVID virus caused people to die. And so they were busy, which means what? We had
They're
to
not
pay
selling.
death claims.
Oh yeah.
So all of a sudden 60% of our revenue goes away, and yet our death claims pick up by 30%. So I'm having to figure out, how do I keep employees? How do I keep sales staff? Because our sales team is employed based on commission, right? And who wanted to buy a pre-need funeral plan in April, May, or June of 2020? Let me just tell you, nobody. Okay, I mean, it was slim. And so I got with my accountant and we sat down and I said, we got to figure out how to take care of our people. I don't know if we, and again, I looked at it this way. I could either run from this problem. I call it flight. I could get away from it and just run from it. I could fight, which that's what we chose to do, or I could freeze and do nothing, which a lot of our friends in funeral profession just basically froze, right? And I said, I can't do that. We've got to be aggressive with this. I can't let people go, because what if things come back and I have to have people? And if I've laid people off or I've had to get rid of sales professionals, then how are we going to come back from this? So I sat down with my chief financial officer and said, I need some answers. We got to figure this out. How long can we exist if we only are taking in 40% of the revenue that we expect, and our claims remain high? So we mapped it all out, and we could do this for a year, for 12 months, and still be alive, right? So I went to my employees. We started having weekly meetings with all of our employees. I started out going around telling my employees throughout the building and getting on calls with our remote people and letting them know what was going on. Then we started having Zoom meetings. I had 155 Zoom meetings from March 20th of 2020 through the end of the year on discussing and letting people know what was going on with our company. But fortunately, things even started coming back a little bit in May. Our revenue was only down 50% in May. And in June, we were down 40%. By July of 2020, things started looking like, we're about 85% of where we expected to be for that month. And then it got back to 100%. And it was like the commitment we made to taking care of our staff, because we had a lot of our people, this is their second income, who work here in our office. In other words, they've got a husband or wife who work elsewhere, and that's the primary job, and this is their secondary job. Some of their spouses lost their job, and this was the only income they had. And so we had to figure out a way to make that work. And so I go back and I look at that time. I can never remember being as anxious and worried as I was back then, because I just didn't know if we were going to make it. I didn't know how we could make it. So if I go back and look at the challenges, and I've thought about this because I've had some other challenges too. I mean, my gosh, part of business is overcoming challenges. That was the biggest one, though. If I look back and say, and it's because I had no control. It wasn't up to me. The government was telling me stuff, and the doctors and nurses were telling me stuff, and the world was telling me stuff that we had to do, and I just didn't know if we'd survive. And fortunately, with God's grace, we came through it phenomenal, and we're able to hop right back into 2021 as if 2020 had never happened. It was crazy.
Yeah, that was a wild time. It's just changed the entire world since then too, right? It's like
Yeah,
so much has changed and hasn't gone back. But
you're right.
so, well, that leads me to my next question. How's death care changed over the last 41 years that you've been in it?
Well, obviously, I mean, one thing stayed the change, or has not changed. One thing stayed the same, and that is funeral directors complaining about cremation. Okay,
Yeah.
I think that started about 40 years ago. And I started hearing it from the founders of this company, and I still hear funeral home owners complaining about it. And I think that we in our profession were not very good at understanding cremation and how to deal with it. I think we understood how to deal with it, but as our industry is or as our profession is in most cases, we're afraid to move. We're afraid it might cause our families not to come to us and so forth. So I think that we made a big mistake of complaining about cremation and not doing more about it in the 90s, right? I think if we had done a better job of pricing, a better job of promoting, a better job of understanding that cremation, is just another method of disposition, and started pricing effectively. But I think, unfortunately, and again, we look back and, at the time we couldn't have seen it as a problem, but I know Batesville Casket Company was, the thought leader in our profession back then, and they were still promoting, the importance of caskets and putting pricing based on, the profit based on your casket and placing it on the casket. And I think if we had started really making an effort across the profession of pricing and putting our profit on services and really stepping up services, then I think we'd be looking back today and we wouldn't be having the revenue issues that a lot of our funeral homes are having these days, because I see that they're getting, funeral homes are getting hurt revenue wise. They're not making the kind of profit that they made back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think it's because of this shift in thinking, and we didn't shift and put more profit on services. So now I think funeral homes have really got to get focused on how can they provide better service and price their service more effectively and not worry about whether it's cremation. You think about this, Curtis, if we had priced or started placing profit on service rather than caskets, you never would have had casket stores, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you had simply had for your caskets, you charged your cost plus $100 or $200 or something per casket, and then put your profit on the services that you provide, then you'd have never seen casket stores. Costco wouldn't have caskets because they wouldn't make any money because people could go to the funeral home and get it cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was if I look back, hindsight being 2020 again, is saying that was a problem and we missed that. I can remember my dad talking about that and saying, we need to start moving our profit to our services. And he never did it. He talked about it for years and he never changed. He always kept his profit on his caskets. And so, I think that hurt the profession. But I think what's got to change is funeral homes have got to make that shift and offer more service and figure out more of what the new funeral consumer desires rather than the same old method that we've done for the last 40, 50 years. I think that's changing. I think the consumer has changed enough. They've already changed. The consumer's not changing. They already changed. And they're looking at doing things differently. It's like funeral homes now thinking, I can't put my prices online, or I can't have funeral. I want families to keep coming into the funeral home. I don't want them to do things online. Well, that's bad thinking, right? I mean, people do things online. I do things online. I do everything online. I buy all my Christmas presents online. I like doing things online. And so you've got to understand that that might be the preference of some of your families. Some of your families may want to do everything online and not come into the funeral home, right? I mean, to be honest with you, who really wants to come to the funeral home? I don't. At that time of my life, I mean, I'll go. But I'm just saying, if I have my receptionist here, who we call our concierge, if I have her, a death in her family, does she really want to go to the funeral home? Well, no, she probably doesn't. She'd probably rather do as much online as she can do. Is that bad? Well, I don't think so. I think you can be caring and still be someone who is focused on technology and doing things online. And I think sometimes our funeral home owners don't understand that you can still be a caring person and do things online or do things remotely.
Yeah.
Things aren't the same anymore. I mean, people live all over the place, and you don't have these nuclear families living in the same region anymore. People live all over the world, and so it's more difficult now to get back together. And we've got to understand that more and figure out how we can be a catalyst to bringing friends and family together. We may have to put services further out. We may have to go 30 days out. We may have to go 60 days out. We may have to go 6 months out before having a true service, particularly in a cremation situation. But it's being capable of handling that and being somewhat of a hospitality expert. It's
Right.
figuring out how to make those events come together and to help families with food and to help families with space and to help families with, how to put an event like this together and us doing that for them rather than them doing it on their own, because they just do it on their own now.
Totally.
So we've got to be the facilitator of it.
Well, imagine, because people, it's like, well, average American gets married twice and they only die once and they spend 3 times as much on a wedding. Well, what would the average cost of a wedding be if they only had 7 days to plan it?
Exactly.
Right. It would completely change it. And I think that you're hitting it on the head here of things that need to be addressed, because the family, it's like, I think there's a fear if they're doing things online that they're going to circumvent the funeral home, where I think, and we've been asked that as a technology provider before, like, what's going to happen? Like, well, doing all this stuff online is going to circumvent the funeral home. It's like, well, no, because there's still a body that needs to be cared for. It's a lot different than every other market. You can't compare it to, like, well, people plan weddings online, they buy houses online, they buy cars online. It's very different because there's a body that needs to be cared for. And so they're going to end up with you somehow. And then when it comes to, like, if in person's important, go to them, go to them. If they're close enough to drive to you, they're close enough for you to drive to them. We had a family member or a friend down the street, their son passed away in an avalanche. This is 4 or 5 years ago. I just loved that the local funeral director, when I called him, said, I want you to help this family. Can we go over there together? Absolutely. You know what I mean? It was just like, it was such a better experience for them because of all the stuff they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And, they were able to handle a lot of the arrangements, like, quote unquote, remotely, maybe they weren't even using technology all that much, but go to them and just meet them where they are. But like, to your point, it's like, if you're going to, we're shoving them into this timeline, the 7-day timeline, 10-day timeline, because it's convenient for a cash flow at the funeral home. So it's like, if you're willing to get past that, it's only going to be painful for, like, what? If you cut it from like 7 days, 30 days, your cash flow is only going to be tight for 20 days or whatever that delta is. And then all of a sudden you're right back on the same cash flow plan. Right. But it's more cash flow probably, because when they have more time to think about it, more time to plan, I would imagine the average spend is going to increase. So it's an interesting thought.
That's correct. They'll spend more money because, I mean, who knows what they're spending now on say, a family reunion, of
Yeah.
trying to get their family or friends together to begin with. So, yeah, I think there's a lot for us to explore there. I mean, I don't perceive to have all the answers at all, but I think we've got to start looking at our profession differently. And what we talk around here is we've got to disrupt our own profession a little bit so that somebody else doesn't come in and disrupt it for us.
Hmm.
And so I think it's just critical at this stage and where we are with the funeral consumer being what the funeral consumer is we've got to work hard on education. We've got to work hard on advertising and promoting the value of what we do. And we've got to change our mindset because, you know, we talk a little bit around here about the book written by Donald Miller called Building a Story Brand.
Yeah.
And he focuses on, every great story has three characters. And I'm simplifying everything he says, but you have a hero, you have a villain or an enemy, and you have a guide. And the guide is the one who helps the hero be successful. And as I talk to funeral homeowners, they many times they view themselves as the hero rather than as the guide, right? Sometimes some funeral homeowners I know view the family as the enemy. They
Yeah.
come in with all these wild ideas, or they don't get along or whatever, and all of a sudden they're the enemy. But they're the customer. So we've got to look at our families and say, my job is to guide them, because a family will only have one or two arrangements that they make for someone who has died in their lifetime. So if they're only making one or two arrangements in their lifetime, they're not going to be very good at it. But they're going to go online and try to do research before they ever talk to you at the funeral home. And so when I talk to funeral owners, I said, you got to know this. They've gotten online. And then what do they read online about funeral service? All the bad stuff, right?
Hmm.
All the funeral homes that have attempted to take advantage of families. And they read that and they think that's probably what your funeral home's like. So you've got to have that in your mind, and you've got to somehow take that thought out of their mind. And they come in thinking that the funeral is going to cost them a lot of money. And if you think about it today, it's not near as expensive comparatively as it used to be. And so I think you've got to, as a funeral homeowner, change your entire approach. And you've got to view yourself as the guide and the family as the hero of the story. And you're helping them to be successful because you, as the guide, are the only one who has a vast amount of experience in working with families and taking care of funerals. I mean, you're the only one. So you've got to really step up your game and say, how can I guide this family the best? Which may mean you need more education. You may need to learn more about how to deal with families today. You may need to focus on hospitality. You may need to focus on how to talk about, the money and the value of funeral service up front rather than waiting
Yeah.
till the end, you know? So again, I'm throwing out all these ideas. I'm not certain what's best, but I just think it's time for us to focus on how can we do things differently to appeal to this new funeral consumer.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas on, because obviously like a funeral expense in a lot of cases is going to be unexpected, and you have an unexpected expense. You're immediately concerned about how high the cost is going to be. And it seems like there's just really not been, aside from like these insurance assignments and things like you guys do, like what's the miss like on the funding side, like a at need funding side of the business, like where, I mean, is it just too risky? It doesn't seem like any
Yeah.
business has really had traction in like providing at need financing.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to look at because um, we've looked into doing at need funeral financing, and we have an issue with it for a couple of reasons. One is, we're afraid that if we have to go and attempt to collect the money from a family, that we would upset a funeral home client because maybe we shouldn't, be as quote unquote aggressive in collecting the money. And so that's why we've decided not to do it. But there's also, as far as collateral is concerned, or how they're going to repay, There's concern about that because once they leave and the emotion's gone, do they just walk away from their expense, the debt, so to speak? But you're absolutely right. I mean, how do we address that? I would hope that the insurance profession, life insurance profession, really does more to promote the value of owning life insurance, even if it's a $5,000 plan or a $10,000 plan. Or we get better at promoting prepaid funerals. I mean, which we can do. I mean, again, we don't. It's definitely not the nature of every family to buy a pre-need funeral when a death occurs. But it should be that way because there should be one or two people affected by that death that would go ahead and purchase their prepaid funeral plan. How can we do better at explaining the importance of pre-planning and prepaying, because that was my dad's thing is my father used to say, I own the only funeral home in Scurry County, Texas. And I want every family to own a pre-need funeral plan because I don't like asking for money. I just want to take care of the family. So, I think you're right. I mean, how do we approach this idea of making sure there's money there? I'm not sure at-need funeral financing is the best path. There are some plans out there. There are some plans coming along that I think might work, but again, it's based on credit scores. And again, you're getting into more of the financial side of this than the taking care of family side of it. So I don't know if that's right. I think that with life insurance and doing life insurance assignments when they don't have a pre-need, I certainly think that increases the revenue at the funeral home. I've talked to some funeral homes that use our assignment service, and they tell me that when they do use an insurance assignment, that they get 30% more revenue than they do when they don't. I don't know if that's necessarily the fact that they have life insurance or the fact that they have they're higher income because they have life insurance. But the facts are, if you use an insurance assignment, you get about 30% more revenue than you would if you didn't. So, golly, how do we do that? I think funeral homes have got to get more focused, maybe up front when they start talking to the family, start talking to them about about whether or not the deceased had a life insurance policy. Maybe at the time when they're making a call to set the arrangement conferences, hey, did mom or dad have a life insurance policy? And if they did, maybe that's something you could possibly use here at the funeral home, and we can help you in filing that claim. Maybe that's something to do. But I'm going to go with us being better at prearranging and prepaying funerals, and or getting better from the funeral director standpoint at talking about the assignment process. So
Yeah.
I'm
I
going to go
think
with
that
those.
makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're thinking like you're the funeral director, like your dad, you don't want to talk about money, you don't want to ask for money, but just some soft way to bring that up where it's like, we don't want this to be something where you're worried about money. We want you to be able to take care of dad the way you want to take care of him. Do you know if you have a life insurance policy? A lot of families, go that route to be able to, fund it. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a difficult situation, but that's, yeah.
You're right. I mean, that's something that we've got to address. But I think it's more of a long-term issue than a short-term issue. And what I mean by that is, I don't think we can come up with a quick solution like at-need financing of the funeral.
Yeah.
I think we've got to come up with how can we promote the value of having a life insurance policy, or how can we promote the value of having a prepaid funeral. So
Yeah.
that's a longer play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's some of the consumer brands that makes me wonder, because I've seen some funeral homes that have tapped into that, like the like Affirm, Klarna, Afterpay, right? Some of these services where it's like you got to buy a T-shirt, and it's like you can pay $40 for a T-shirt or pay $10 a week for the next 4 weeks, right? Like there's those types of services I've seen some funeral homes start looking at and using, and makes me wonder how that goes, because like you said, if it goes sideways and the family doesn't make the payment, like do those consumer brands, is it less of an issue of it blowing up in the funeral home space or not.
Right.
I don't know. It's worth more discussion, but got me
Sure
thinking
is.
about that as you were sharing all that.
Yeah.
So two more questions. One here is, and I think you've hit on this a little bit, but where do you really hope to see the future of death care go? And where do you what is it a hopeful, bright future in your mind?
Yeah. I think the best days of funeral service are ahead of us. And I think they are because I'm starting to see, as I've talked more and more to funeral home owners, I'm starting to see the shift in thinking that they know now they need to make changes in how they work with families. When I see the more adoption of Passari and the adoption of our planning center, and funeral homes who see the value of letting people do some planning online. These are shifts that, I would even say 10 years ago, we weren't seeing at all. And when I would talk to funeral homes, let's say 10 years ago, about the changing funeral consumer, they were thinking the funeral consumer is really not changing for me. And so I see that shift happening, but I also see a shift in the younger people now, because I employ a lot of younger people. It's been an effort on my part since 2012 to employ younger people. And I'm really starting to study and really get into what they're thinking. And I believe they are going to be more funeral service oriented than my generation. I think that my generation, as baby boomers, we did not deal with these situations well. As baby boomer, we've seen a ton of change in our lives. Computers, internet, cell phones. You think about all the things that we've seen in our lifetime, and it's like we haven't handled things very well. I'm just going to say that as a whole. And I think we moved away from family units, and we moved away from, having a close circle of friends. Those are things we've moved away from. But I see in my son, I see in my daughters, I see in some of the people who work here, they have a closer circle of friends, and they are more family oriented, and they're learning to be more family oriented through technology. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're adapting to the technology better than my generation did, and they're learning the importance, as they did through COVID, of funeral service. And I think they got it at that time and saw that. So based upon what I'm seeing, is I think the best days of funeral service are ahead, because I think funeral directors are starting to realize they need to make a change. And I'm also seeing a change in the demographic, in that they view funeral service as more valuable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, totally. Those are great insights. And yeah, I think all of us that are in the profession, it's good for all of us to hear that, and because just words are powerful. So last question is about you, which is just, is there anything about you that would surprise us to know?
I got to tell you, I get asked this from time to time. So I'm going to tell you my standard answer, and then I might figure out something else while I'm talking. But so in high school, okay, I was in the band, and I played the oboe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that's usually surprising to people, since I'm, 6'3", 215 pounds, and I played the oboe. I don't know if I'm necessarily proud of that, but it is what it is. I was also drum major of my marching band in high school, only because you can't march with an oboe.
Yeah. Wow. Well, with how much basketball and stuff you were playing too, I haven't. Totally surprising.
From West Texas, everybody assumes you play football.
Yeah.
But I played football in junior high as a ninth grader, and I got headaches from hitting people, and I didn't like it. And so that's why I started focusing on basketball. The best decision I ever made, by the way.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Kris, this has been an excellent conversation, and really great to hear your backstory and all the just incredible things that you've accomplished and you've done, and you've really just contributed so much to the profession that, again, I believe all of us have benefited from this good work that you've been doing. So I just want to thank you for your time today and appreciate it so much.
Well, Curtis, I'm humbled that you would ask me. Thank you very much. I'm just excited to see guys like you who are so in tune with the profession and the desire to shape our profession in a way that would cause it to be relevant for a long, long time. And so thank you for doing something like the PodCasket. I think that's a great idea. And I appreciate just being with you. And again, I'm humbled that you would even ask me. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It was an obvious choice. So thanks, Kris.